I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, refusing to believe the numbers reflecting back at me. We were sitting in the private dining room of an upscale Atlanta steakhouse, celebrating my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. I had just opened my banking app to pay for the expensive champagne my sister ordered when I saw it. A zero balance, $250,000 completely gone. Sweeping my gaze across the table, I looked at my family. When I demanded to know what happened, my brother-in-law, Brad, simply leaned back in his chair, snorted, and took a slow sip of his expensive bourbon. He did not even try to hide it. He looked me dead in the eye and smiled. "We needed that money more than you, Nia." He laughed, dismissing my entire life savings with a wave of his hand. "You are single and making a good salary. Do not be so dramatic." My sister Chloe chimed in, immediately defending her husband. She actually called me selfish for causing a scene while they were preparing to welcome their second child. I turned to my parents, expecting them to intervene, but my mother Valerie just rolled her eyes and told me to sit down and stop ruining their special night over a temporary loan. A temporary loan of $250,000 stolen right out of my account. My hands trembled as I reached into my designer leather bag. But I was not reaching for a tissue to wipe away tears. I had stopped crying over these people a long time ago. "Then you will not mind what is coming next," I told them, keeping my voice deadly calm as I locked eyes with Brad. He smirked, and they all started to laugh at my supposed empty threat. They thought I was powerless. But before the sound of their laughter could even fade, a massive boom shook the very foundation of the building. The heavy double doors of the private dining suite flew off their hinges with a deafening crash. Heavily armed federal agents swarmed the room, tactical gear flashing under the crystal chandeliers, screaming for Brad to get on the floor immediately. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old, and my family always treated me like the boring, invisible accountant they could financially abuse to fund their luxury lifestyle. They had absolutely no idea that my accounting job was just a cover. I am actually a senior forensic financial investigator working directly with federal authorities. And the $250,000 Brad so arrogantly stole was not my personal savings. It was an active federal honeypot account used to track international money laundering networks. By stealing from it, Brad had just committed a massive federal crime. Before I explain exactly how my own flesh and blood traded my future for a sprawling mansion and a fake upper-class image, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic family members who mistook your quiet nature for weakness. You will absolutely want to stick around to hear how the golden child of our family ended up losing everything she prized most, and how justice was finally served. The private dining room at the steakhouse smelled of expensive orchids and roasted prime rib. It was a space designed exclusively for the city elite. This was the perfect backdrop for my parents to broadcast their success to anyone willing to watch. Marcus and Valerie had spent 35 years building a logistics empire in Atlanta. Tonight was all about cementing their legacy and displaying the ultimate image of success. My mother wore a custom silk gown that easily cost more than my first car. My father held court at the head of the table, pouring vintage wine with practiced elegance. To the outside world, they were the absolute symbol of respectability. But inside our family, that success was measured by a very specific and deeply toxic yardstick. That yardstick was my older sister Chloe. She sat to my right, radiating the kind of smug satisfaction reserved for people who genuinely believe they are better than everyone else. Chloe was the former pageant queen who did everything according to our parents' script. Tonight she was adorned in heavy diamond jewelry and draped in a designer maternity dress that perfectly accentuated her second pregnancy. She was the golden child who could do no wrong. Next to her sat Brad. He was a white investment broker who wore flashy designer watches and spoke entirely too loudly for an intimate dinner setting. Brad was currently waving down a waiter to demand a specific rare bourbon, snapping his fingers in a way that made my skin crawl. My parents absolutely adored him. To them, Brad was not just a son-in-law. He was a financial genius, and a major status symbol who elevated their social standing in wealthy circles. He represented access to a world they desperately wanted to conquer. Brad dominated the conversation before the appetizers even arrived. He leaned heavily against the table, boasting about a new luxury condo development his firm was supposedly acquiring in Midtown. He threw around loud buzzwords about cryptocurrency portfolios and aggressive market yields. He made sure everyone in the room knew exactly how much money he claimed to be managing. My father nodded, along with eager approval hanging on to every single word. My mother practically beamed, gazing at Chloe, as if she had single-handedly secured the family fortune just by marrying this loud, arrogant man. Then the attention inevitably turned to me. It always did when they needed someone to pity so they could feel better about themselves. I was sitting quietly at the edge of the table, sipping sparkling water and wearing a simple tailored suit. In their eyes, I was the tragic disappointment of the family. The 32-year-old single woman who worked endless hours at a boring mid-level accounting firm. I had no husband to show off, no children to parade around, and no flashy investments to brag about. I was just the reliable workhorse. "You look exhausted, Nia." My mother noted, her tone dripping with that fake maternal concern she perfected for an audience. "Are they still overworking you at that little firm of yours? You really need to find some balance in your life before your youth is completely gone." Chloe let out a soft, practiced laugh and reached for Brad's hand. "Mom, leave her alone. Not everyone is cut out for the fast-paced life of an executive. Besides, if Nia did not work those long hours, what else would she do? Go home to an empty apartment?" She turned to me and patted my arm condescendingly. "I have a friend at the country club who has a nice brother. He is an assistant manager at a local grocery store. I could set you up so you do not have to be alone for another holiday. I know how hard it must be for you to watch us building our family while you just balance spreadsheets." I simply offered a tight, polite smile and took a sip of my water. I did not take the bait. I never did. Arguing with them was like talking to a brick wall. They needed me to be the failure so Chloe could be the star. They needed me to be the struggling worker bee so Brad could look like the financial savior. I let them believe whatever they wanted because my reality was something they could not possibly comprehend. While they were busy comparing leased sports cars and country club memberships, I was tracing illicit funds across international borders and dismantling criminal syndicates. My quiet, boring life was a carefully constructed shield that kept my real work completely hidden. The dinner dragged on through heavy courses of expensive steak and lobster. Brad ordered another round of the highest-priced drinks on the menu. He generously offered to let me pay for the tip since I needed to learn how to treat wealthy people if I ever wanted to move up in the corporate world. My father chuckled at the insult, raising his glass to toast Brad and his supposed business acumen. I watched the entire charade with calm detachment. The forced laughter, the desperate clinging to a fake upper-class image, the hollow boasting. It was a masterclass in grandiosity and delusion. But as the dessert plates were cleared away, the atmosphere in the room was about to shift. I felt my phone vibrate heavily in my purse. It was a high-priority alert from the secure banking application I monitored. The illusion of their perfect family was about to shatter completely, and they had no idea the storm was already sitting right there at the table with them. I slipped my hand into my leather purse and silenced the harsh vibration. Under the cover of the heavy linen tablecloth, I angled the screen away from the rest of the family. The notification banner flashed bright red across the encrypted interface. It was a Tier 1 security alert triggered by a massive unauthorized wire transfer. My pulse steadied into a slow, calculated rhythm as I unlocked the application using biometric authentication. I tapped the alert and watched the transaction ledger load. $250,000 had just been routed out of the primary holding account. The balance at the bottom of the screen updated in real time, dropping from $250,000 directly to zero. This was not a glitch. The funds had been successfully pushed through a series of automated clearinghouse protocols and wired to an external offshore routing number. To anyone else, losing that amount of money would induce an immediate panic attack. But I am not anyone else. I am a forensic accountant who specializes in tracking illicit cash flows. I did not gasp. I did not drop my phone. I simply opened a secondary diagnostic tool built directly into the secure portal. If someone was bold enough to initiate a six-figure wire fraud, they left a digital footprint. I pulled the metadata attached to the transfer authorization. The system displayed the device signature, the timestamp, and the originating Internet Protocol address. I memorized the sequence of numbers instantly. I ran a rapid reverse lookup on the network location, tapping quietly on the glass screen. The ping bounced back within seconds. The transaction did not originate from a shadowy hacker collective in Eastern Europe or a sophisticated cybercrime syndicate. The location data pinned directly to a private residential network situated in the wealthy Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta. It was a specific gated subdivision. I looked at the registered network name displayed on my screen. Bradston Investment Enterprises Private. It was Brad. I slowly lifted my gaze from the screen and looked across the table. Brad was currently leaning back in his velvet-upholstered chair, laughing uproariously at a joke my father had just told. He held a crystal glass of bourbon in one hand and rested the other on Chloe and her designer maternity dress. He looked incredibly relaxed for a man who had just committed wire fraud. The sheer audacity of his crime was staggering. He had not just hacked into a random account. He had used the shared family password vault, a system my mother had relentlessly pressured me into joining years ago for supposed emergency purposes, to access what he firmly believed was my entire personal life savings. Brad assumed he was draining the retirement fund of his quiet, lonely sister-in-law. He thought he was taking money from a mid-level firm accountant who would be too intimidated by the family dynamics to fight back. He looked at me and saw a convenient victim to bail out his failing business ventures. He needed liquidity to cover his terrible cryptocurrency gambles, and he decided my future was the perfect collateral. He had zero remorse. He was drinking top-shelf liquor, celebrating his own brilliance while believing he had just financially ruined me. The dining room suddenly felt completely different to me. The classical music playing softly from the ceiling speakers sounded like a ticking clock. My mother was busy inspecting her fresh manicure, and Chloe was adjusting her diamond necklace, complaining about the service being too slow. They were entirely wrapped up in their bubble of privilege and ignorance. They loved the wealth Brad projected. They worshipped the illusion of his success. And right now, that illusion was being funded by a direct theft from a federal government honeypot. I locked my phone and slid it back into my purse. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The anger inside me was not a fiery explosion. It was cold, sharp, and precise. I had spent my entire life biting my tongue to keep the peace. I had endured the snide comments, the constant comparisons, the absolute disregard for my boundaries. I had played the role of the boring, invisible daughter because it was easier than fighting their deeply ingrained prejudices. But stealing $250,000 crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Brad had just handed me the match to burn this entire toxic family dynamic to the ground. Right on cue, the waiter approached our table carrying a black leather presenter. He placed the heavy bill directly in the center of the table, right next to the floral centerpiece. The total for the lavish steaks, the vintage wine, the rare bourbon, and the indulgent desserts was astronomical. My father reached for his wallet with a performative sigh, but Brad waved him off with a grand, magnanimous gesture. "Put your wallet away, Marcus," Brad announced loudly, ensuring the waiter and the neighboring tables could hear his generosity. "I got this tonight. We are celebrating family, and family takes care of each other." He pulled out a sleek metal credit card and tossed it onto the leather folder with a loud clack. Chloe beamed at him, looking around to make sure everyone saw how well her husband provided for them. My mother clapped her hands together, expressing her deep gratitude for such a wonderful son-in-law. They were all playing their parts perfectly, completely blind to the reality of the situation. They thought they were sitting at the pinnacle of high society. They had no idea they were actually sitting in the middle of a federal crime scene. I watched the metal cards settle on the table. The hypocrisy was nauseating. He was buying them dinner using the very financial security he thought he had just stolen from me. It was time. I did not raise my voice, but I spoke clearly enough to cut through their sickening chorus of mutual admiration. I picked up my glass of sparkling water and leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, preparing to shatter their perfect illusion into a million pieces. I set my glass of sparkling water back down onto the table with a soft clink. The sound barely registered over the ambient restaurant noise, but it felt deafening to me. I looked directly at my brother-in-law. Before you cover the tip, Brad, I have a quick financial question for you. I kept my voice perfectly level. Why did an internet protocol address registered to your private home network just initiate a wire transfer of $250,000 out of my savings account? The table went dead silent. The jazz music overhead suddenly seemed far too loud. My father froze with his wineglass halfway to his mouth. My mother stopped inspecting her nails. Chloe looked at Brad, her brow furrowing in confusion. Brad blinked. For a fraction of a second, I saw the panic flash behind his eyes. It was the primal fear of a thief getting caught in the act. But Brad was a master manipulator. He quickly masked the panic with his signature arrogant smirk. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and let out a long, exasperated sigh, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. I have no idea what you are talking about, Nia. He chuckled, shaking his head. Have you been drinking on an empty stomach? You are making absolutely no sense. I did not break eye contact. Do not play dumb with me, Brad. You used the family emergency password vault. You accessed my primary routing numbers. You pushed $250,000 to an offshore holding account exactly 7 minutes ago. I have the device signature and the network logs. You stole my money. The word stole hung in the air like a physical weight. I expected denial. I expected him to spin a lie about hackers or identity theft. Instead, Brad just snorted. He picked up his bourbon, took a slow sip, and rolled his eyes. Oh, please, Nia, stop being so dramatic. I did not steal anything. I borrowed it. It is a temporary bridge loan. My investment firm needed a rapid liquidity injection to finalize the closing costs on that Midtown condo project I was just telling Marcus about. The capital was just sitting in your account gathering dust. I put it to work. You will get it all back next month with an 8% yield. You should honestly be thanking me for managing your idle cash. He admitted it. He sat in a public restaurant and casually admitted to draining $250,000 without my consent. He genuinely believed that his status as the wealthy white son-in-law gave him absolute jurisdiction over my assets. Borrowing requires asking for permission. I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Taking money in secret is called wire fraud. It is a felony. Chloe slammed her hands down on the table, making the silverware rattle. Theft! Are you seriously using that word against your own brother-in-law? She glared at me, her face twisting with righteous indignation. We are family, Nia. Family helps family. Brad is out here making massive deals to secure our legacy, and you are crying over a temporary transfer. Chloe defensively rubbed her pregnant belly, glaring at me as if I were a monster. We are about to welcome our second child into this world. We have expenses. We have real responsibilities. You live alone in a cheap apartment. You have no husband to support and no children to feed. What do you even need that much money for anyway? You are being unbelievably selfish right now. I turned to my parents, expecting them to intervene, expecting them to realize the sheer insanity of the situation. Instead, my father Marcus leaned forward and pointed a stern finger at me. Lower your voice right now, Nia. My father ordered, his tone laced with absolute authority. You are embarrassing us in front of the entire restaurant. Brad is a certified financial professional. He knows exactly how to maneuver capital to generate wealth. You are just a mid-level accountant. You do not understand high-level real estate acquisitions. When his deal closes, he will pay you back. Do not ruin your mother and my anniversary dinner over a simple misunderstanding. A simple misunderstanding. My own father was actively defending the man who had just robbed me blind. They were all so deeply intoxicated by Brad and his illusion of wealth that they were willing to sacrifice me without a second thought. I was the sacrificial lamb meant to be slaughtered on the altar of Chloe and her perfect marriage. I am not lowering my voice, I said, reaching into my designer bag. And I am not waiting for a fake real estate deal to close. I am calling the Atlanta Police Department right now and reporting a grand larceny. I pulled my phone out. I did not even get the chance to unlock the screen. My mother Valerie lunged out of her chair. Her hand swung through the air in a blur of motion. The sharp crack of her palm striking my cheek echoed sharply against the wood-paneled walls of the private dining room. The physical force of the slap snapped my head to the side. A stinging heat spread across my skin instantly. I slowly turned my face back to look at her. My mother stood over me, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a toxic mixture of hatred and embarrassment. "You will do no such thing, you miserable, ungrateful girl," she hissed, her voice vibrating with pure venom. "You are trying to destroy this family. You are trying to ruin your sister and her husband because you are bitter. You have always been jealous of Chloe. You have always hated seeing her happy and successful, while you have nothing. I will not let you ruin my 35th anniversary with your pathetic jealousy. Get out." I touched my burning cheek. I did not cry. I did not scream. The lingering hope that they might actually love me, the tiny, fragile piece of my heart that still wanted their approval, died completely in that exact moment. The slap was the final confirmation I needed. "Get out of here right now," Valerie demanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the heavy wooden doors. I picked up my purse and stood up from the table. I looked at Brad, who was smirking triumphantly. I looked at Chloe, who was shaking her head in disgust. And I looked at my parents, who had just chosen a criminal over their own flesh and blood. "You think I am destroying this family?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. I shook my head slowly. "No, Mom. This family just destroyed itself." I turned my back on them and walked out of the private dining room. I left them to their expensive steaks and their vintage wine. I left them to their grand illusions. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully bullied me into submission. They had absolutely no idea that by kicking me out, they had just initiated a war they could never possibly win. And tomorrow morning, the real consequences would begin. The morning sun had barely crested the Atlanta skyline when I pulled into the parking lot of the Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. The burning sting of my mother's slap had long faded, replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. I sat in my car for a moment, the engine idling, and watched the precinct doors. Most people in my position would be paralyzed by grief or confusion. They would be drafting long, emotional text messages to their siblings begging for an explanation. They would be consulting therapists about family trauma or calling lawyers in a panic. I was doing none of those things. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat. The screen glowed with the forensic data I had compiled overnight. I hadn't spent the dark hours crying over childhood memories or mourning the loss of my family's affection. I had spent them meticulously building an airtight, irrefutable digital case against Bradston Investment Enterprises Private. I had traced the exact routing of the $250,000. I mapped the IP address, the timestamp, and the device signature that Brad used to initiate the transfer. I had captured the encrypted logs showing the unauthorized access through the shared password vault. I had documented everything, converting raw data into a clear chronological narrative of grand larceny and wire fraud. This wasn't an emotional family dispute anymore. This was a precise, calculated legal procedure. My mind had shifted entirely into its professional gear. I was no longer Nia, the disappointed daughter. I was Nia, the senior forensic financial investigator. And I was going to dismantle Brad's illusion with the same methodical precision I used to take down international crime syndicates. I walked into the precinct with my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. The atmosphere inside was bustling and chaotic, a typical Monday morning mix of petty theft reports and administrative noise. I approached the front desk, bypassing the general intake line, and asked directly for Detective Miller in the Financial Crimes Unit. I knew Miller. We had collaborated on a complex embezzlement case 2 years ago. He was sharp, no nonsense, and hated arrogant white-collar criminals almost as much as I did. When Miller came down to the lobby, his eyebrows shot up in surprise. He recognized me instantly, probably expecting me to be consulting on a federal case, not standing at the public intake counter. We moved to a small interview room, the stark fluorescent lights illuminating the chipped paint on the walls. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I opened my laptop and slid a thick stack of printed documents across the scarred metal table. I laid out the facts clinically, stripping away the emotional context. I explained the theft, the unauthorized access, the transfer of funds, and the destination account. I provided the IP address that linked the crime directly to Brad's home network. Miller reviewed the documents, his expression turning serious. He knew my background, knew the caliber of my work. He didn't ask if I was sure. He asked how I wanted to proceed. I told him I was filing a formal complaint for grand larceny, identity theft, and unauthorized access to a secure financial network. I wanted it all on the record. He began the formal intake process, typing details into the system. As he worked, he paused, looking at me carefully. You know, this means an active investigation, Nia. It means search warrants. It means freezing accounts. Your brother-in-law is going to feel this. I expect him to, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. He stole $250,000. He admitted it publicly. I want the law to treat him exactly as it would any other thief. Miller nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He finalized the report, generating an official case number. I signed the documents with a steady hand. There was no hesitation, no lingering doubt. The moment ink met paper, the familial bond was permanently severed. They had chosen their side. I had chosen mine. I walked out of the precinct into the bright morning light. The air felt different now. The weight of expectations, the constant pressure to conform to my parents' twisted version of success was gone. I had initiated a chain reaction that would inevitably crush the fragile facade my family had constructed. Brad would soon realize that his arrogance had a price, and my parents would learn that their conditional love could not protect them from the legal consequences of protecting a criminal. I got back into my car and placed the police report on the passenger seat. It was a tangible piece of evidence, a weapon forged from truth and data. I started the engine, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. They wouldn't surrender quietly. They would fight, they would manipulate, they would try to break me. But they were fighting the quiet, invisible daughter they thought they knew. They were completely unprepared for the forensic investigator they were about to face. I put the car in gear and drove away, ready for whatever came next. My phone vibrated against the center console before I even reached the highway on ramp. The dashboard screen illuminated with a name I had spent my entire life trying to please. It was my father. He did not use my name when I answered the call. He simply launched into a tirade that vibrated through the car speakers with the force of a physical blow. I just received a very disturbing phone call from Brad. My father barked, his voice tight with suppressed rage. He tells me the police just contacted his lawyer about a formal complaint. Tell me you did not actually go to the precinct, Nia. Tell me you are not this foolish. I kept my eyes on the road, navigating the morning traffic with smooth precision. I did exactly what I said I was going to do, Marcus. I reported a grand larceny. Brad stole my money, and now he is going to face the justice system. The sound of my father slamming his fist against his heavy oak desk echoed through the speakers. You are out of your mind, he shouted. You are tearing this family apart over a temporary cash flow issue. I am giving you exactly 1 hour to call that detective back and withdraw the complaint. You will tell them it was a misunderstanding. You will tell them you authorized the transfer. If you do not, I am calling my estate lawyer. I will strip your name from the family trust today. I will revoke your shareholder status in the logistics company. You will be cut out of the will completely. You will walk away with absolutely nothing. His threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. For decades, that inheritance had been the ultimate weapon my parents used to enforce compliance. It was the golden leash they used to control every aspect of our lives. But as I listened to him leverage his wealth to protect a criminal, I felt nothing but a profound sense of exhaustion. My mind flashed back to a humid Sunday afternoon 5 years ago. I was sitting at the massive mahogany dining table in my parents' house, surrounded by towering stacks of financial ledgers. I had just spent 72 hours straight auditing my father's logistics company after his previous accountant made a catastrophic error that nearly triggered a massive federal tax penalty. I had worked through the night untangling the mess and saving the family business from a crippling fine. When I finally handed my father the corrected binder, I was exhausted, but proud. I thought I had finally earned his respect. Instead, Marcus had barely flipped through the pages. He tossed the binder aside and looked at me with cold, unyielding eyes. Black excellence means we do not make mistakes in the first place. Nia, he had lectured me, pointing a stern finger. We have to work 10 times harder just to get a seat at the table in this city. We cannot afford to look sloppy. A piece of paper correcting a mistake does not make you a visionary. It just makes you a janitor cleaning up a mess. Do better. I had swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, accepting the harsh criticism as a necessary lesson in survival. But the very next weekend, the definition of visionary in my father's eyes shifted dramatically. Brad had strutted into our house for Sunday dinner, twirling the keys to a brand new leased Porsche. He had no solid track record, no proven assets, and no real business acumen. All he had was a flashy pitch deck for a decentralized cryptocurrency fund and the overwhelming confidence of a mediocre white man who had never been told no. He casually pitched his half-baked investment strategy over grilled salmon, and my father ate up every single word. Marcus had poured Brad a glass of his most expensive 20-year-old scotch, clapped him on the shoulder, and called him a brilliant mind. The double standard was blinding. I was expected to be flawless and visible, and grateful for the opportunity to serve the family empire. I carried the crushing burden of their generational trauma, the demand to be perfect so white society could never look down on us. Yet when Brad walked into the room bringing nothing but empty promises and arrogant entitlement, my parents rolled out the red carpet. They treated him like royalty because his presence validated their wealth. Having a flashy white investment broker for a son-in-law was their ultimate status symbol. It proved they had finally arrived. They tolerated his arrogance because it came packaged in a demographic they desperately wanted to impress. "You can keep the inheritance, Marcus," I said, my voice breaking the silence on the phone line. "I do not want your money. I do not want your shares. I do not want anything that comes with your conditions." "You are acting like a spoiled child," my father seethed. "You have no idea what it took for your mother and me to build this wealth. We bled for this company. We built an empire from the ground up so you and your sister would never have to struggle. And this is how you repay us, by dragging the police into our private business, by trying to send your own brother-in-law to jail. You are betraying your own people, Naya. You are bringing the system down on our heads because you are bitter." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "I am not betraying anyone," I replied calmly. "Brad betrayed you. He used your emergency password vault to commit wire fraud. He is using your hard-earned wealth to cover up his own spectacular failures. You are protecting a parasite because you are too proud to admit you were wrong about him." "Watch your mouth," my father snarled. "Brad is managing complex acquisitions. He is playing at a level you could never understand. He is family." "He is a thief," I corrected sharply. "And if you continue to defend him, you are going to go down with him. You want to talk about black excellence. You want to talk about protecting the legacy you built. Then you should be thanking me for cutting this cancer out of your network before he drained your accounts too. Because believe me, Marcus, once he burns through my money, yours is exactly where he will look next." There was a long, tense pause on the line. I could hear his heavy breathing. I had struck a nerve. My father was a proud man, but he was not a stupid businessman. Deep down beneath the layers of denial and social climbing, he knew I was right. He knew Brad was bleeding them dry, but his pride would never allow him to admit it to the daughter he had spent a lifetime diminishing. "If you do not drop these charges by noon, you are dead to me," he said, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "I will make sure you are exiled from this family. You will not be welcome at holidays. You will not be welcome at your sister's baby shower. You will be entirely alone." I stared at the highway stretching out in front of me. The sky was bright, clear, and vast. For the first time in my 32 years, the threat of exile did not terrify me. It sounded exactly like freedom. "Make the call, Marcus," I said softly. "Call your lawyer. Disinherit me. Erase my name from the trust. Do whatever you need to do to protect your fragile ego. But keep some of that cash liquid. Brad is going to need a very expensive defense attorney. I pressed the button on the steering wheel and ended the call. The silence that filled the car was absolute and beautiful. There was no more arguing, no more gaslighting, no more desperate attempts to prove my worth to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I had just burned the bridge to my past, and the flames illuminated exactly where I needed to go next. By the time I parked my car in the secured underground garage of my office building, my phone was buzzing again. This time it was not a call. It was a relentless cascade of social media notifications, dozens of them pinging in rapid succession. I sat in the driver's seat and opened Instagram. My sister had wasted no time launching her counteroffensive. Chloe had always been a master of public relations, and she knew exactly how to weaponize her online presence to protect her image. There it was at the very top of my feed, a perfectly curated black and white photograph of Chloe and Brad. Brad had his arms wrapped protectively around her pregnant belly, and Chloe was looking down with a gentle maternal smile. It looked like a portrait of absolute domestic bliss. But the caption beneath the photo was a venomous, calculated assassination of my character. "My heart is incredibly heavy today," the caption began. "It is so painful when the people you love the most allow jealousy to consume their souls. Brad and I are focusing on the health of our growing family right now, but we ask for your prayers regarding my younger sister, Nia. She has been struggling with severe mental health issues and profound loneliness for a very long time. Unfortunately, her bitterness over her own single status has manifested into a delusional vendetta against my husband. She is currently spreading false and damaging allegations about our finances simply because she cannot stand to see us happy and thriving. We love her, and we hope she gets the psychiatric help she desperately needs. Please respect our privacy during this difficult family crisis." I read the words twice. It was a textbook smear campaign. Chloe was expertly playing the role of the graceful, concerned older sister while painting me as the angry, bitter black woman who was deeply envious of her perfect life. She was using my single status as a weapon, framing my independence as a tragic flaw. And the comments section was already a toxic wasteland of misplaced sympathy. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends were flooding the post with prayer hands and heart emojis. They praised Chloe for her grace and condemned me for trying to tear down a successful black family. They called me toxic. They called me ungrateful. They urged me to seek therapy and apologize to Brad immediately. I did not feel the urge to defend myself in the comments. I did not type out an angry rebuttal or try to expose the truth to an audience committed to misunderstanding me. Instead, I simply took screenshots. I captured the post, the caption, and every single defamatory comment. I saved them securely to my encrypted cloud drive. Chloe thought she was winning the public opinion war. She had no idea she was just handing me documented evidence of public defamation and witness tampering. I closed the application and walked toward the elevator, feeling an odd sense of calm. Their predictability was almost boring. I had just swiped my badge to enter the secure lobby of my office when my phone rang again. It was Detective Miller from the Financial Crimes Unit. I answered immediately, expecting him to tell me that the arrest warrant for Brad had been approved. Instead, his voice sounded strained and heavy with frustration. "Nia, we have a problem," Miller said bluntly. I had to pause the freeze order on the destination account. "The investigation is officially suspended pending further review." I stopped walking. Suspended. "What are you talking about, Miller? I gave you the network logs. I gave you the transaction identifiers. The digital evidence is irrefutable. The digital evidence is solid." Miller agreed, his tone apologetic. "But your brother-in-law just walked into the precinct 15 minutes ago. He did not come alone. He brought a high-powered corporate defense attorney with him, and they brought paperwork." "What kind of paperwork?" I asked, my mind racing through the possibilities. "A comprehensive notarized power of attorney," Miller explained. "It explicitly grants Brad full legal authorization to manage your investment portfolios, initiate wire transfers, and reallocate your liquid assets to maximize yield. It has your signature on it, Nia. It has a notary stamp from a reputable firm downtown. According to this document, Brad did not steal your money. He executed a legally authorized financial maneuver on your behalf. I stood frozen in the lobby, gripping my phone. A forged power of attorney. Brad had actually taken the time to forge a complex legal document, complete with a fraudulent notary stamp just to cover his tracks. He must have had this prepared in advance, anticipating that I might eventually notice the missing funds. He probably intended to use it to drain my account slowly, but when his crypto investments tanked, he panicked and took it all at once. Miller continued speaking, cutting through my racing thoughts. Nia, you and I both know the document is fake. But my hands are tied right now, because he has presented a legally binding contract authorizing the transfer. My captain is classifying this as a civil dispute between family members. Unless you can definitively prove the signature is a forgery through a certified handwriting expert and invalidate the notary, we cannot pursue criminal charges at the local level. The prosecutor will not touch it. They consider it a messy domestic issue. Brad thought he was a genius. He thought he had found the perfect loophole. By presenting the forged document to the local police, he effectively stalled the immediate investigation. He bought himself time. He knew that proving a forgery in civil court could take months or even years. He assumed I would run out of money and legal resources long before I could ever see the inside of a courtroom. He thought he had outsmarted me. I did not argue with Miller. I did not yell about the injustice of the legal system. I took a deep breath and let a cold smile touch my lips. I understand, detective, I said, my voice perfectly steady. You have to follow protocol. If the department views this as a civil dispute, then I will handle it accordingly. Thank you for your time. Nia, do not do anything reckless, Miller warned, sensing the calm in my voice. Let the civil lawyers handle this. Do not take matters into your own hands. I will handle it exactly by the book, Miller. Have a good day. I ended the call and walked into the elevator. Brad thought he had won the chess match. He thought his forged piece of paper was a get-out-of-jail-free card. But his arrogance had completely blinded him to the reality of his situation. He was playing checkers while I was managing a federal operation. By forging a power of attorney and submitting it to a law enforcement agency to cover up the theft of government funds, Brad had not just saved himself from local grand larceny charges. He had just committed obstruction of justice, fabricating evidence, and aggravated identity theft. He had multiplied his federal charges exponentially. Every lie he told, every fake document he produced was just another nail in his own coffin. My family was busy celebrating their victory on social media. They were patting themselves on the back for silencing the difficult daughter and protecting their golden boy. They believed the threat was neutralized, but they had no idea that while the local police were forced to step back, the federal government was just getting started. I walked out of the elevator and headed straight to my secure workstation. It was time to let Brad think he was winning, right up until the exact moment I tore his entire world apart. I settled into my ergonomic desk chair and woke up my monitors. The secure terminal hummed to life, requiring my biometric scan and dual-factor authentication. I was preparing to draft the preliminary briefing for my federal handlers, outlining the wire fraud and the newly fabricated power of attorney. I needed to formally request the upgrade of the investigation from a passive monitoring operation to an active federal takedown. But before my fingers could even touch the keyboard, the sleek black phone on my desk began to ring. The caller identification display flashed a name that made me pause. It was the Director of Human Resources. I picked up the receiver and was immediately summoned to the executive suite on the top floor. The tone of the request was not a casual invitation, it was a mandatory directive. I locked my workstation and made my way to the glass-walled elevators. The executive floor was a quiet, sterile environment reserved for the managing partners of the accounting firm. It was a space designed to intimidate, featuring imported marble floors and panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline. When I stepped into the main conference room, I found David, our firm managing partner, and Sarah, the head of human resources, sitting rigidly at the long mahogany table. Neither of them offered a polite greeting or a warm smile. Sarah gestured toward the empty leather chair opposite them, her expression a practiced mask of corporate neutrality. David cleared his throat and adjusted his silk tie. He looked deeply uncomfortable, but completely resolved. Nia, we have an extremely delicate situation on our hands. He began, his voice tight with professional anxiety. About an hour ago, I received a direct phone call from Bradston Investment Enterprises. I spoke personally with the founder, Brad. He informed me that he is your brother-in-law. I sat perfectly still, resting my hands flat on the polished table. Brad had not wasted a single second. Realizing that his forged document would only stall the police temporarily, he had decided to go on a scorched earth offensive. He wanted to destroy my credibility completely, cutting off my income and my professional reputation, so I would be too impoverished and disgraced to fight back. What exactly did my brother-in-law say to you, David? I asked, keeping my voice even and unbothered. David exchanged a heavy look with Sarah before continuing. He called out of deep concern for your well-being and for the security of our firm. Brad disclosed that you have recently suffered a severe mental health breakdown. He claimed that your long-standing jealousy of your sister has manifested into a dangerous paranoia. But more importantly, Nia, he warned us that you recently transferred $250,000 out of a shared family trust account and are currently refusing to return the funds. He suggested that you might be experiencing a psychotic break that compels you to hoard capital. I felt a sharp, dark amusement rise in my chest. Brad was truly putting on the performance of a lifetime. He was using his flashy title, his confident white male privilege, and his smooth broker vocabulary to bypass any burden of proof. He called a highly respected accounting firm and casually accused one of their senior employees of massive financial theft and clinical insanity. And because he sounded wealthy and carried the aura of a successful investor, David had swallowed the lie completely whole. Sarah slid a thick manila folder across the table toward me. Nia, you have been a reliable employee here for years, she said, adopting a tone of gentle but firm condescension. However, we are a financial institution. Our clients trust us with their sensitive data and their capital. When a prominent local broker calls our managing partner to report that one of our accountants has stolen $250,000 from her own family, we cannot simply ignore the liability. He is attempting to leverage your firm to silence a personal dispute, I stated, looking directly into David's eyes. Did he provide you with any police reports or court documents to substantiate these claims of theft? Did he offer any medical records to prove this supposed mental breakdown? David shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. He stated that the family is trying to handle this quietly to protect you from criminal prosecution. He said your parents are heartbroken and are currently seeking psychiatric intervention on your behalf. He forwarded us a copy of a social media post made by your sister this morning, which seems to corroborate the severity of your mental state. We are not a court of law, Nia. We do not need a conviction to take preventative action to protect our firm and our clients. They were falling right into his trap. Brad knew exactly how corporate risk management worked. He knew that the mere suggestion of financial impropriety combined with rumors of mental instability would force the firm to act aggressively. They would rather terminate an innocent black woman than risk alienating their wealthy client base or facing a hypothetical liability. So what is the firm deciding to do? I asked, gesturing toward the manila folder. Sarah opened the folder and presented a single sheet of paper printed with the company letterhead. Effective immediately, you are being placed on unpaid administrative leave, pending a full internal investigation into your conduct and your financial activities on our network. You must surrender your company identification badge, your access keys, and your corporate laptop. Your network privileges have already been revoked. We have arranged for a security officer to escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings and then guide you out of the building. The sheer audacity of the situation was almost breathtaking. My family had effectively orchestrated my termination. They had weaponized my single status, my quiet nature, and their own fake upper-class image to convince my employer that I was a dangerous, unstable thief. They wanted to break me. They wanted me to feel the crushing weight of unemployment and public humiliation. They wanted me crawling back to them, begging for forgiveness, and dropping the police report just so I could survive. If I were truly the mid-level corporate accountant they believed me to be, this would have been a devastating fatal blow. I would be losing my health insurance, my income, and my career trajectory all in one swift motion. I would be utterly destroyed. But I was not a mid-level accountant. This firm was merely a cover identity constructed and maintained by the federal government. My actual salary, my real health insurance, and my true clearance level were entirely untouched by David and Sarah. The laptop they were demanding I surrender contained nothing but dummy spreadsheets and meaningless corporate audits. My secure federal terminal, the one I actually used to build the case against Brad, was a completely separate encrypted machine hidden off-site. I looked at the suspension notice. I did not argue. I did not plead for my job or try to convince them that Brad was the actual criminal. Fighting them would only blow my cover and complicate the federal operation. Furthermore, being suspended from this corporate shell job was exactly what I needed right now. It gave me the perfect alibi. It gave me unrestricted time to finalize the trap. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out a pen, and signed the administrative leave notice with a swift, fluid motion. I unclipped my corporate badge from my lapel and placed it gently on top of the signed document. "I understand your position, David," I said, standing up from the leather chair and smoothing out my suit. "You have to protect the firm, but I highly recommend that you document the exact time and nature of Bradston's phone call today. You are going to need it for your own records very soon." David furrowed his brow, clearly confused by my calm compliance. "What do you mean by that, Nia?" I smiled a cool, detached smile. "I mean that when the federal indictments drop, you will want to prove that your firm was a victim of his deception and not an active participant in his obstruction of justice. Have a wonderful afternoon." I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving David and Sarah staring after me in stunned silence. I returned to my desk, packed my personal items into a small box, and allowed the heavy-set security guard to escort me through the lobby. I could feel the eyes of my coworkers burning into my back. The rumors were likely already spreading like wildfire through the cubicles. Let them whisper. Let them believe the narrative Brad had so carefully spun. I walked out into the warm Atlanta afternoon air, holding my small box of belongings. Brad had just played his biggest card. He thought he had completely neutralized the threat. He thought he had successfully isolated me, stripping away my resources and leaving me desperate. He had no idea that by getting me suspended, he had just freed up my entire schedule. He had given me exactly the time and space I needed to orchestrate his total, absolute destruction. I walked to my car, pulled out my personal phone, and dialed the direct encrypted line to my federal handler. It was time to pull the trigger. I pulled my car out of the parking garage and merged onto the bustling Atlanta highway, the midday sun beating down on my windshield. My personal cell phone rested on the passenger seat, completely silent now that I had blocked my entire family. I reached into the hidden compartment of my center console and pulled out a secondary device, a heavily encrypted federal-issue smartphone. I dialed a secured line, waiting exactly 3 rings before my handler, Agent Carter, picked up. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I informed Carter that the target had taken the bait perfectly. Brad had not only initiated the unauthorized wire transfer from the Honeypot account, but he had also escalated his criminal activity by forging a power of attorney and submitting it to local law enforcement to obstruct justice. I detailed how he had subsequently orchestrated my suspension from the cover firm using false allegations, providing us with a clear pattern of witness intimidation and malicious retaliation. Carter listened quietly, his keystrokes echoing faintly over the line as he updated the federal ledger. He confirmed that the task force was fully assembled and ready to move from passive surveillance to an active takedown. The trap was set. All we needed now was for Brad to tighten the noose around his own neck. I ended the call and drove to my apartment complex in the quiet outskirts of the city. As I pulled into the visitor loop to check my mailbox, I noticed a sleek black town car idling near the entrance. A man in a sharply tailored gray suit stood on the sidewalk holding a thick, rigid envelope. He checked his phone, looked at my license plate, and walked directly toward my vehicle. He knocked sharply on my driver's side window. I lowered the glass a few inches, keeping my expression entirely neutral. He asked if I was Nia, stating my full legal name. When I confirmed, he shoved the heavy envelope through the gap in the window and stated that I had been officially served. He turned on his heel, climbed back into the town car, and drove away without another word. I parked my car and carried the envelope up to my apartment. I tossed my keys onto the kitchen island and sat at the dining table. The return address, printed in embossed gold lettering in the top left corner, belonged to Sterling and Pierce, one of the most notoriously aggressive corporate defense law firms in Buckhead. They were the kind of expensive, ruthless lawyers wealthy people hired when they wanted to crush someone into absolute submission. Brad was clearly tapping into his remaining credit lines to fund a legal assault, hoping to terrify me into silence. I sliced the envelope open with a kitchen knife and pulled out a stack of crisp, heavy parchment paper. The document was a formal cease and desist notice accompanied by a draft complaint for a civil lawsuit. It was an absolute masterpiece of legal manipulation and psychological warfare. The letter began by formally accusing me of malicious defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and intentional infliction of emotional distress against my sister Chloe and her husband Brad. The lawyers claimed that my baseless police report had caused severe emotional trauma to an expectant mother and had irreparably damaged Brad's pristine professional reputation in the financial sector. They explicitly referenced my suspension from the accounting firm earlier that day, weaponizing it as definitive proof that my own employer believed I was mentally unstable and a liability. But the real audacity of the document was buried in the settlement terms. Brad and his high-priced lawyers were offering me a way out. They promised not to file the multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit, which they gleefully noted would bankrupt me and ruin my professional future forever, provided I met 3 non-negotiable demands by 6 o'clock the following evening. First, I had to immediately return to the Atlanta Police Department and officially withdraw my grand larceny complaint, signing a sworn affidavit that I had filed the initial report under a state of severe psychological distress and confusion. Second, I was required to post a public apology across all my personal social media platforms. The lawyers had actually drafted the exact wording for me to use. The draft forced me to state that I had suffered a mental breakdown, that I deeply regretted my jealous and toxic behavior toward my sister, and that Brad was an upstanding, generous brother-in-law who had done nothing wrong. They wanted me to legally and publicly brand myself as crazy, bitter, and entirely at fault. They wanted to strip away my dignity and hang it up as a trophy for their social circle. Third, and perhaps the most breathtakingly arrogant demand of all, was the final document attached to the back of the packet. It was a deed of gift. The lawyers demanded that I sign this binding legal contract which retroactively classified the stolen $250,000 not as a theft, or even as the temporary bridge loan Brad had claimed at the restaurant, but as a voluntary non-refundable financial gift to my sister Chloe to support her growing family. I read the terms again, letting the sheer magnitude of their delusion wash over me. Brad was trying to strong-arm me into creating a legitimate paper trail for his wire fraud. He wanted me to sign a document that legally transferred $250,000 of federal government money into his personal pockets, and he was using the threat of a devastating lawsuit and public humiliation to force my hand. They thought this letter would break me. They assumed that a quiet, single, freshly suspended accountant would read these threats, look at the embossed letterhead of a terrifying corporate law firm, and completely crumble under the pressure. They expected me to dissolve into tears of panic, sign the documents out of sheer desperation, and quietly disappear into the shadows while they lived happily ever after on my dime. I did not cry. I smiled. Brad had just made the most catastrophic mistake of his entire life. By hiring a law firm to send this document, he had crossed the line from local white-collar crime into federal extortion and witness intimidation. Sending a threatening demand for money and forced affidavits across state lines or through a courier service constituted mail fraud and blackmail. He had literally put his intent to extort me into writing, printed it on expensive paper, and delivered it directly to a federal investigator. He was handing me the nails for his own coffin on a silver platter. I laid the documents out on the kitchen island and took high-resolution photographs of every single page, immediately uploading them to the secure federal server for Agent Carter to process. This extortion letter was the final piece of the puzzle. The evidence was now absolutely insurmountable. Just as I finished uploading the final page, my personal phone began to ring. I had unblocked my family earlier, knowing they would inevitably reach out to follow up on their legal threat. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. Valerie was calling to apply the emotional pressure, acting as the designated closer for Brad's extortion scheme. I let it ring 3 times, controlling my breathing before answering. I did not say hello. I just waited in silence. Nia, my mother said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet patronizing tone. I know you received the documents from Brad's lawyers. I told them not to be too harsh, but you left them no choice with your terrible behavior. I remained silent, letting her fill the empty air with her manipulation. We need to talk. Valerie continued, dropping the fake sweetness for a harder, commanding edge. I am willing to meet you at the coffee shop near your apartment in an hour. We are going to sit down, we are going to talk some sense into you, and you are going to sign those papers. If you do this, I will personally convince Brad to introduce you to one of his business partners. You can finally stop being alone, and maybe you can get your life back on track after you lost your job today. She was offering me a man as a consolation prize for signing away my entire life savings. The deep, ingrained misogyny and obsession with status was so pathetic it was almost comical. I looked at the extortion documents spread across my kitchen island. I thought about the federal strike team currently staging their operational gear across the city. I will meet you at the coffee shop, Valerie, I replied, my voice cool and hollow. See you in an hour. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the table. I walked into my bedroom to change my clothes. I was not going to this meeting to argue. I was not going to negotiate. I was going to look the woman who raised me right in the eyes and let her dig her own grave. The artisanal coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta was buzzing with the mid-afternoon rush when I walked through the glass doors. It was one of those aggressively trendy places with exposed brick walls and pour-over coffee that cost $10 a cup. It was exactly the kind of place my mother chose when she wanted to be seen by the right demographics but still maintain an air of casual superiority. I spotted Valerie sitting at a corner table bathed in the natural light streaming from the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored cream pantsuit, with her signature pearls resting against her collarbone. Her hair was perfectly laid without a single strand out of place. She sat with perfect posture, sipping a sparkling water, while casting subtle, judgmental glances at the college students working on their laptops nearby. To anyone else, she looked like the epitome of affluent Southern grace. To me, she looked like a predator waiting for her prey to stumble into the snare. I approached the table and pulled out the metal chair, sitting down across from her. I did not take off my sunglasses immediately, and I did not offer a greeting. I just sat back and watched her. Valerie lowered her water glass and offered a tight, manufactured smile that did not reach her eyes. She let out a long, dramatic sigh, looking me up and down with blatant disapproval. "Look at you, Nia," she began, her voice pitched low but dripping with condescension. "You look completely exhausted. Your posture is terrible and you are projecting such dark, heavy energy. It breaks a mother's heart to see her own child spiraling like this. I told your father that this suspension from your job might actually be a blessing in disguise. It gives you the time you clearly need to seek professional psychiatric help." She was starting strong, going straight for the psychological jugular. She was attempting to rewrite the reality of the last 24 hours, framing my orchestrated termination not as a malicious attack, but as a tragic, inevitable consequence of my own supposed mental instability. I did not speak. I simply crossed my legs and let her continue to spin her web. My silence unnerved her slightly, but Valerie was a professional narcissist. She quickly filled the void with her own booming sense of authority. "You have always struggled to fit in," she continued, leaning forward and lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Ever since you were a little girl, you isolated yourself. While Chloe was out building a network and establishing a real presence in this city, you were hiding in your room. We tried to accept your quiet nature, but this recent behavior is dangerous. Accusing your brother-in-law of grand larceny, calling the police on family. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is for us? We have spent decades building a pristine reputation in Atlanta. We are respected. And you are dragging our name through the mud because you are throwing a jealous tantrum over money you do not even know how to use. I watched her lips move, analyzing her choice of words. She was minimizing a $250,000 federal wire fraud down to a jealous tantrum. She was prioritizing the family reputation over the fact that a white man had just robbed her black daughter blind. In her twisted hierarchy of values, Brad holding up their proximity to white wealth was infinitely more important than my financial survival. Brad is a financial visionary, Valerie stated, her tone hardening into a strict lecture. He manages millions of dollars daily. When he saw that your savings were just sitting in a low-yield account doing absolutely nothing, he took the initiative to roll those funds into a high-return asset. He was doing you a favor, Nia. He was trying to help you build some actual wealth so you would not end up a destitute spinster. And instead of thanking him, you acted like a rabid animal. You forced him to involve his corporate lawyers just to protect himself from your delusions. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a sleek silver pen, placing it on the table between us. She tapped the pen with her perfectly manicured fingernail. "Here is what is going to happen," she dictated, her voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You are going to sign the deed of gift that Brad Lawyers sent you. You are going to classify that money as a loving contribution to your sister-growing family. Then you are going to march down to that police precinct and withdraw your ridiculous complaint. You will tell them you made a mistake because you were off your medication." I leaned back in my chair, letting the ambient noise of the coffee shop wash over us. The espresso machines hissing, the faint chatter of other patrons, the soft acoustic music playing overhead. It all felt so entirely disconnected from the sheer toxicity radiating from the woman sitting across from me. "And if I sign these papers," I finally asked, my voice so flat and calm it made her blink in surprise. "What exactly is my reward for financing Brad failing crypto investments and letting you all publicly brand me as insane?" Valerie smiled, thinking she had finally broken my spirit. She thought my question was a surrender. She leaned back, looking incredibly pleased with her own negotiation skills. "If you sign the papers, we will forgive this entire embarrassing episode," she promised generously. "We will welcome you back into the family fold. You can come to Chloe baby shower next month. And more importantly, Brad has a colleague at his investment firm. He is a senior analyst, recently divorced, and looking for a quiet woman to settle down with. Brad is willing to set up an introduction. We can finally get you out of that lonely apartment and find you a husband so you can stop harboring all this bitter jealousy toward your sister. We are handing you a future, Nia. All you have to do is sign the paper and apologize." She was offering to sell me to one of Brad's equally arrogant friends in exchange for $250,000. She genuinely believed that the ultimate cure for my supposed mental illness was the attention of a mediocre man. She thought my entire identity was wrapped up in my desperation to be married and accepted by them. I looked at the silver pen resting on the wooden table. Then I looked up at the woman who had given birth to me. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. I felt a profound clinical emptiness regarding her existence. She was not a mother protecting her young. She was an accomplice helping a thief launder stolen money. I did not argue. I did not waste my breath explaining that Brad firm was bankrupt or that his Midtown development project was a complete fabrication. I did not tell her that the lawyers she was so proud of had just committed federal extortion. Explaining the truth to a narcissist is like trying to teach a fish how to fly. It is a spectacular waste of time and energy. Instead, I let a slow, sharp smile spread across my face. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a predator gives right before the trap snaps shut. The expression was so foreign on my usually stoic face that Valerie actually recoiled slightly, pulling her designer handbag closer to her chest. I reached into my blazer pocket. I did not pull out the extortion documents. I pulled out my heavily encrypted federal smartphone. I held the device under the table, hidden from her view. My thumb moved expertly across the glass screen, unlocking the secure federal portal. I navigated to the Active Operations tab. The digital dossier containing the wire fraud evidence, the forged power of attorney, the IP address logs, and the fresh photographs of the extortion demands was fully compiled and ready. "What are you doing?" Valerie demanded, her voice ticking up an octave in sudden irritation. "Put your phone away when I'm speaking to you, Nia. This is exactly the kind of disrespectful behavior that got you suspended today. You need to focus and make the right choice before Brad loses his patience completely." I did not look away from her eyes as my thumb hovered over the transmit button. "You are absolutely right, Valerie," I said, my voice dropping to a chillingly smooth cadence. "Family is incredibly important. And you have made it perfectly clear exactly where I stand in this family hierarchy. You have laid out the terms beautifully." I pressed my thumb down on the screen. The encrypted data packet encrypted flashed green, indicating a successful upload directly to the Federal Task Force server. I had just officially authorized Operation Vanguard. The tactical raid was now locked into the federal schedule. The digital point of no return had been crossed. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. I picked up her expensive silver pen from the table and handed it back to her. "I will not be needing this right now," I told her, standing up from the table. "I am not going to sign anything in a coffee shop. Legal documents of this magnitude require the proper setting. Tell Brad and Chloe that I will come to their mansion tonight. Have the papers ready on the kitchen island. I will arrive at exactly 7 o'clock this evening to finalize everything exactly the way it deserves to be finalized." Valerie let out a long, dramatic exhale of relief, completely missing the dangerous undertone in my voice. She smiled proudly, taking her pen back and dropping it into her purse. "I knew you would finally see reason, Nia," she said, smoothing her hair. "It is about time you stopped fighting us and accepted your place. Wear something nice tonight. We will order takeout and put this ugly business behind us. Brad will be so relieved that you are finally cooperating." "Oh, I am sure he will be," I replied, looking down at her one last time. "Make sure everyone is there, Valerie. You are not going to want to miss a single second of this evening." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her sitting there in her pristine cream pantsuit, completely oblivious to the massive federal hammer I had just dropped on her perfect world. She thought I had capitulated. She thought the quiet, boring daughter had finally been crushed into total submission. She had absolutely no idea that I had just given the FBI the green light to raid her Golden Child mansion and that I had scheduled it right in the middle of dinner. I walked to my car, the afternoon sun warming my face. The countdown clock had officially started. Brad had exactly 4 hours of freedom left. I did not drive back to the mid-level accounting firm that had just suspended me. That building, with its imported marble floors and panicked human resources directors, was nothing more than a carefully constructed stage play. It was a corporate shell, a necessary fiction designed to provide me with a mundane, legitimate cover story. I merged onto the interstate, heading towards a completely different part of the city. I drove toward an unmarked, brutalist concrete building nestled discreetly in an industrial park just outside the Atlanta perimeter. There were no flashy corporate logos on the exterior of this building. There were no glass-walled elevators or sweeping views of the skyline. The perimeter was secured by reinforced steel bollards and a discreet perimeter of surveillance cameras. I pulled my vehicle up to the heavy security gate. A guard in dark tactical gear stepped out of the booth. He did not ask for my name. He simply scanned the encrypted barcode on my federal credential and nodded, sending the heavy steel gate rolling open. I parked in my designated spot and walked into the building. The atmosphere inside was a stark contrast to the pretentious country club energy of my family social circles. The air here was sharp, professional, and thrumming with highly classified urgency. I walked past the front reception desk, swiped my biometric badge through 3 successive security checkpoints, and entered the sensitive compartmented information facility. The heavy vault-like door clicked shut behind me, locking out the rest of the world. This was my actual office. The room was a massive nerve center of glowing monitors, tracking algorithms, and digital threat maps. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division moved swiftly between workstations. The chatter was a steady stream of tactical updates, subpoena requests, and blockchain decryption codes. My family had spent the last decade mocking me for being a low-level paper pusher. They constantly asked when I was going to get a real promotion and stop wasting my life staring at spreadsheets. My mother loved to tell her friends that I was just a cautious little bookkeeper who lacked the ambition to make real money. They had absolutely no idea that I am a senior forensic financial advisor for a joint federal task force. My job is not to balance corporate tax returns or audit local businesses. My job is to hunt down international money laundering syndicates, track dark web cryptocurrency cartels, and dismantle the financial networks of organized crime. I am the architect of a digital tracking system that traces illicit capital as it moves through offshore shell companies. I do not just look at spreadsheets, I weaponize them. Agent Carter was waiting for me at the main tactical table in the center of the room. He was a veteran FBI field agent with sharp eyes and a relentless work ethic. Spread out across the table were the printed photographs of the extortion documents I had uploaded earlier, along with the digital logs of Brad wire transfer and his forged power of attorney. "You cut it close with that upload," Nia Carter said, pushing a fresh cup of black coffee across the table toward me. The strike team was waiting for the final green light. "We have teams positioned a mile out from the Buckhead address. They are ready to roll on your signal." I picked up the coffee and took a sip, letting the bitter heat focus my mind. The green light is officially given, Carter. The target requested my presence at his residence at exactly 7 o'clock tonight to force me into signing these extortion papers. He expects a quiet surrender. Carter looked down at the forged documents, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "I have tracked cartel bosses and international arms dealers who were smarter than this guy. Your brother-in-law actually documented his own federal extortion plot on expensive law firm stationery and had it hand-delivered to a federal investigator. The absolute arrogance is almost hard to comprehend." "It is not just arrogance," I explained, leaning over the tactical map of Chloe and Brad estate. "It is privilege. Brad has spent his entire life failing upward. He throws around big investment terms and wears expensive suits, and people just hand him their money because he looks the part. My family worshipped him for it. They handed him the keys to the castle because he fit their warped aesthetic of white wealth. He has never faced a single consequence in his entire life. He genuinely believes the law does not apply to him." "Well, the law is about to introduce itself very aggressively," Carter noted, tapping a finger on the blueprint of the mansion. "Let us review the asset forfeiture protocols." For the next hour, we meticulously went through the operational details. I explained exactly how Brad had fallen into our trap. Several months ago, the task force needed to establish a series of honeypot accounts to track how local brokers were funneling dirty crypto money through legitimate Atlanta real estate developments. I had set up one of those dummy accounts under my own cover identity, seeding it with $250,000 of traceable federal funds. Brad was supposed to be a minor blip on our radar. He was just a loudmouth broker we were passively monitoring to see who he was doing business with. But Brad was incredibly greedy and spectacularly lazy. Instead of hustling for new clients to save his bankrupt firm, he went looking for easy prey. He used my family's shared password vault to snoop through my financial records. When he saw that massive balance sitting in my account, he could not resist. He thought he was stealing from his quiet, defenseless sister-in-law. He thought he had found the perfect victim. By stealing that specific money, Brad triggered an automatic federal tripwire. He did not just commit local theft, he stole from the United States Treasury. And by forging a legal document to obstruct the local police investigation, he escalated his crimes to a level that guaranteed decades in a federal penitentiary. I watched the tactical team gearing up in the armory through the glass partition. Heavily armed agents were checking their tactical vests, securing their entry tools, and syncing their communications gear. They were preparing to breach a multi-million-dollar mansion in one of the wealthiest zip codes in the state. "You do not have to be there for the breach," Nia Carter said quietly, breaking my concentration. "We have all the evidence we need. You can stay here in the command center. It is going to be ugly. Your family is going to be in the crossfire." I turned to look at Carter, my expression completely resolute. I am going Carter. I am not going to hide in a command center while this goes down. My family has spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They tried to fire me, they tried to extort me, and they tried to sell me off to one of Brad's friends just to keep their fake image intact. I am going to walk through that front door and look them directly in the eyes when their entire world collapses. Carter nodded, respecting the finality in my tone. He reached into a secure lockbox on the table and pulled out a heavy silver federal badge encased in a leather wallet. He slid it across the table toward me. "Then you better take this," he said. "You are going in as the lead investigator on this operation." I picked up the badge, feeling the cold weight of the metal against my palm. I slipped it into the inner pocket of my blazer right next to my heart. The boring accountant was officially dead. The federal investigator was clocking in. I checked my watch. It was exactly 5:30 in the afternoon. I had an hour and a half to navigate rush hour traffic and arrive at my sister house for the most important dinner of my life. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the facility, my boots clicking sharply against the concrete floor. The trap was fully primed. It was time to spring it. As the heavy traffic of the Atlanta interstate blurred past my windows, my mind shifted into the clinical, precise rhythm that defined my actual career. I navigated the lanes with mechanical efficiency while sifting through the digital architecture of the trap I had built. Brad thought he was a financial genius. He thought the markets were his personal playground, and that moving capital was simply a matter of having the right connections and enough audacity. But he lacked even a fundamental understanding of how modern federal tracking networks actually operate. The $250,000 sitting in my holding account was never my personal life savings. It was a highly classified digital snare known within the intelligence community as a honeypot. A honeypot is a decoy. It is a carefully constructed illusion designed to look like a vulnerable, lucrative target to lure in hostile actors. I had purposefully linked a dummy interface to the family password vault that my mother had relentlessly guilt-tripped me into joining years ago. She had claimed it was necessary for family emergencies and legacy planning. I knew the truth. She wanted it so they could monitor my finances, judge my lifestyle, and ensure I was not out earning their golden child. Instead of fighting her, I gave them access to exactly what I wanted them to see. The funds inside that specific portfolio were actually cryptographic seed money provided directly by the United States Department of the Treasury. Every single dollar in that digital ledger carried a unique tracking token embedded deep within its metadata. We had engineered it to look like a standard high-yield savings account belonging to a mid-level corporate accountant. It was boring enough to avoid suspicion, but wealthy enough to attract a desperate thief. The Joint Task Force had deployed this specific honeypot because we were actively hunting a localized syndicate of shell companies using Atlanta real estate developments to launder dirty cryptocurrency. Brad and his failing boutique brokerage firm had brushed against our radar during a routine network sweep. He was a remarkably small fish, swimming in waters far too deep for his mediocre skills. His firm was hemorrhaging cash, and he was desperate for sudden liquidity to maintain the lavish lifestyle my family so deeply worshipped. We needed to know exactly which offshore accounts he was funneling his clients' money to. So I dangled the perfect bait. I let my family see the balance. I knew Brad possessed an ego so massive it would not allow him to ignore $250,000 sitting idle under the name of a black woman he actively despised and constantly underestimated. When Brad executed that wire transfer during my parents' anniversary dinner, he did not just move cash from one bank to another. He triggered a cascading sequence of silent federal alarms. The very moment he bypassed the biometric locks using the shared vault credentials, the system began recording his digital footprint. When he pushed the money through the automated clearinghouse network, the routing numbers he utilized automatically alerted the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. He thought he was routing untraceable funds through an offshore server to finance his phantom Midtown condo project. Instead, he had essentially attached a federal tracking beacon to his own financial profile and handed the remote control directly to the FBI. The legal ramifications of his arrogance were absolute and entirely inescapable. If he had actually stolen from a private citizen, he might have faced a localized grand larceny charge. A slick corporate defense attorney like the ones he hired for his extortion attempt might have successfully bargained it down to a civil restitution agreement and a slap on the wrist. He would have paid a fine and gone right back to attending country club dinners. But stealing federal funds is an entirely different beast altogether. Under federal law, wire fraud carries a 20-year maximum sentence per count. Stealing government property adds another 10 years. And by taking the extra step of forging that power of attorney and presenting it to the local police department to cover his tracks, he triggered the aggravated identity theft and obstruction of justice statutes. In the federal justice system, there is no parole. There are no convenient plea deals that allow wealthy white-collar criminals to maintain their golf handicaps while serving house arrest. The conviction rate for federal wire fraud when backed by digital forensic evidence is astronomically high. Brad had mathematically guaranteed his own destruction. The supreme irony of the entire operation was that my own family had perfectly enabled his downfall. Valerie and Marcus were so deeply obsessed with maintaining the illusion of generational wealth and so desperate to validate Chloe and her marriage to a white investment broker that they actively shielded a parasite. They looked at my quiet, stable life and saw only failure because I did not fit their loud, flashy aesthetic. They looked at his leased sports cars, his designer watches, and his aggressive financial jargon and saw the ultimate success story. Their internalized prejudice and their desperate need for white proximity made them the perfect unwitting accomplices. They had spent the last 48 hours trying to gaslight me into surrendering. My mother had slapped me in a public restaurant. My father had threatened to disinherit me. Chloe had launched a vicious smear campaign against my mental health. They were completely oblivious to the fact that their golden boy had just dragged them into the blast radius of a federal racketeering investigation. If they had simply stopped to ask themselves why a supposedly brilliant investment banker needed to steal from a mid-level accountant, the entire house of cards would have collapsed. But critical thinking had always been secondary to looking good in family photographs. My car dashboard navigation indicated I was exactly 10 minutes away from the Buckhead gated community. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the towering Georgia pines, casting long, sharp shadows across the manicured lawns and sprawling driveways of the city elite. I adjusted the rearview mirror, checking my reflection. I looked exactly like the compliant, defeated, and exhausted sister they were expecting to walk through their heavy oak doors. I wore a simple neutral blouse and a modest blazer. I made sure my expression looked appropriately subdued. They wanted me broken. They wanted me to sign away my dignity, my money and my sanity for the promise of a blind date with a random corporate analyst and a seat at Chloe's upcoming baby shower. They genuinely believed that the threat of exile from their toxic inner circle was the ultimate punishment. They thought I was driving to their mansion to beg for their forgiveness. I tapped my earpiece to verify the secure comms link was still active. A double click of static confirmed that Agent Carter and the tactical team were listening. They were positioned in unmarked vans just outside the neighborhood perimeter waiting for my signal. I turned the steering wheel, taking the final exit toward the luxury subdivision. Brad had exactly 12 minutes left to enjoy his stolen wealth. As the heavy iron gates of the luxury subdivision slowly swung open to admit my vehicle, my mind was entirely consumed by the beautiful, undeniable mathematics of digital forensics. To truly understand the sheer magnitude of the catastrophe Brad had just brought down upon his own head, you have to look past the emotional family drama and examine the raw, unfeeling data. Brad thought he was playing a high-stakes game of corporate chess. In reality, he had blindly wandered into a federal minefield, and every single move he made had triggered another tripwire. His first and most catastrophic error was the assumption that a forged power of attorney would shield him from consequences. He believed that local law enforcement would be easily intimidated by aggressive corporate lawyers and a notarized piece of paper. He was correct about the local police, but he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the document he had created. He thought forging my signature was a simple matter of lifting an image from a digital PDF and pasting it onto a legal contract. He had extracted my signature from a joint family tax return I had helped my parents file 3 years ago. What he did not realize was that modern digital signatures and the files that house them contain deeply embedded cryptographic hashes and metadata that cannot be erased by basic commercial software. When his expensive Buckhead attorneys submitted that forged document to the local police precinct, my federal team immediately intercepted the digital scan. We did not just look at the ink on the page. We ran the file through our advanced decryption algorithms. The metadata embedded in the forgery still contained the source code from a basic commercial photo editing application. Worse for him, we extracted the exact timestamp of when the pixels were manipulated. That timestamp perfectly matched the media access control address of the personal laptop sitting right now on his expensive mahogany desk. We had absolute irrefutable digital proof of the exact minute he manufactured the fraudulent document. But the forgery was merely the appetizer in his feast of felonies. The main course of his destruction was the wire transfer itself. To move that $250,000 out of my honeypot account, Brad utilized an encrypted payment gateway. He thought masking his internet protocol address with a commercial virtual private network would hide his physical location. It was an incredibly amateurish tactic. The federal honeypot he hacked into was specifically engineered to strip away commercial encryption instantly. It did not just record his entry, it executed a reverse capture protocol. The moment he clicked transfer, our servers logged the exact sequence of data packets he sent. Because he attempted to route the stolen money through an intermediate server located in Delaware, before pushing it to his offshore shell account, he crossed state lines with the digital transmission. That single foolish action automatically triggered the federal wire fraud statute. By pairing interstate wire fraud with a forged legal document, he added aggravated identity theft to his rapidly growing list of federal offenses. But the ultimate fatal blow, the singular mistake that transformed this from a messy family financial dispute into a massive federal operation, was the true nature of the funds he stole. He did not steal private wealth from a mid-level accountant. He stole sovereign capital belonging directly to the United States Treasury. In the eyes of the Department of Justice, Brad was no longer just a greedy, arrogant brother-in-law. He had elevated himself to the status of a hostile actor who had actively breached a federal financial operation. This triggered an automatic and severe classification upgrade. His crime was no longer a local matter. It was now a national target case. The United States government does not take kindly to arrogant brokers hacking into Treasury-funded honeypots to finance their fake real estate developments. When the local detective was forced to step back and classify the situation as a civil dispute, it was not a defeat for me. It was a required procedural handoff. The moment the local jurisdiction cleared the path, the federal government swooped in with absolute, unmitigated authority. We now had full justification to invoke far-reaching federal statutes. Furthermore, Brad had hired a ruthless corporate law firm to send me an extortion letter across state lines demanding I sign a fraudulent deed of gift and a false affidavit. He used the United States Postal Service and commercial couriers to deliver those threats. With that single envelope, he added multiple counts of mail fraud and federal extortion to his indictment. He had meticulously documented his own blackmail plot, printed it on expensive embossed paper, and delivered it directly into the hands of a senior federal investigator. The irony was breathtaking. Brad and my sister Chloe had spent their entire relationship looking down on me. They viewed my quiet life as a symptom of failure. My parents had actively enabled this delusion indulging Brad because he presented the illusion of white generational wealth. They were so blinded by their internalized prejudices and their desperate thirst for high society validation that they never bothered to question the mechanics of his supposed success. They handed him the keys to the family password vault because they trusted his confident swagger more than my quiet competence. They had spent the last 48 hours trying to gaslight me into surrendering. They orchestrated my suspension from my cover job thinking they were stripping away my only source of income. They threatened to disinherit me, assuming I desperately needed their money to survive. They thought they were backing me into a corner where my only option was to submit to their demands, sign away my stolen savings, and publicly brand myself as mentally unstable. They thought they were the predators. They had no idea they were already caught in the jaws of a federal trap that was about to snap shut with bone-crushing force. Brad thought his money, his lawyers, and his privilege made him untouchable. But privilege does not stop a federal search warrant. A flashy smile and an expensive suit do not negate a cryptographic hash mismatch on a forged legal document. The digital evidence we had compiled was absolute. It did not care about his social standing or his country club memberships. It only cared about the mathematical certainty of his guilt. I turned my vehicle onto the sweeping, tree-lined street that led to their sprawling estate. The manicured lawns and towering facades of the neighborhood felt like a monument to unearned arrogance. It was a community built on the desperate need to project superiority. But tonight, that illusion was going to be violently dismantled. I checked the dashboard clock. The timing was perfectly aligned. The tactical teams were fully staged in their unmarked vehicles, maintaining a tight, invisible perimeter around the property. They were waiting for my specific signal to initiate the breach. I pulled my car up to the heavy wrought iron gates of my sister driveway. I rolled down my window and pressed the intercom button, ready to walk into the lion's den and deliver the final crushing blow. The metallic buzz of the intercom echoed through the quiet evening air, but no one answered immediately. As I sat in my idling car waiting for the heavy iron gates to swing open, my mind replayed the phone call I had made exactly 2 hours prior. Before I could execute the final breach, I needed absolute confirmation that every single player was securely positioned on the board. I needed to ensure that Brad had not suddenly decided to skip town and that my parents were present to witness the exact consequences of their blind favoritism. So I had parked my car in an empty lot a few miles away, taken a deep breath, and dialed my sister's personal number to deliver the greatest acting performance of my entire life. Chloe had answered on the fourth ring, letting out a loud theatrical sigh to demonstrate just how much of an inconvenience my existence was to her. I did not start with anger. I started with a sharp, trembling intake of breath, carefully manufactured to sound like someone who had completely broken under the pressure. "Chloe," I had whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. "Please do not hang up." I heard the distinct clinking of crystal glasses in the background. She put me on speakerphone immediately. Of course she did. She wanted an audience for my surrender. I could hear my mother murmuring in the background and the low, arrogant chuckle of Brad. "What do you want, Nia?" Chloe asked, her tone dripping with bored superiority. "If you are calling to throw another psychotic tantrum, my lawyers advised me to hang up and call the police. I am heavily pregnant, and I cannot deal with your toxic energy right now." I forced a wet, desperate sob into the receiver. "I am not throwing a tantrum, Chloe. I am so sorry. I am just so scared. They suspended me from work today. My firm took my badge. Mom told me about the lawsuit Brad is preparing to file, and I just cannot afford to defend myself. I have nothing left. Please, Chloe. You are my big sister. Please tell Brad to call off the lawyers. I will do whatever you both want." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute music to my ears. I could practically feel the smug satisfaction radiating through the cellular towers. This was the exact narrative they had been craving. The rebellious, difficult sister had finally been crushed by the consequences of her own actions. The natural hierarchy of the family had been restored. I heard Brad step closer to the phone. His voice was loud, booming with unearned confidence. "You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to accuse me of a felony, you crazy bitch," he sneered. "You tried to ruin my reputation over a temporary cash flow adjustment. You are lucky I do not sue you into absolute bankruptcy right now and leave you homeless." "I know, Brad, I know," I cried, letting my voice hitch with fake panic. I was just confused. My medication must have been off, and I misunderstood the bank statements. Mom was right. I was just jealous of what you and Chloe have built. I am so incredibly sorry. I read the settlement documents. I will sign the deed of gift. You can keep the $250,000. Just please do not let them take me to court. I will sign the apology. I will post whatever you want on my social media. Chloe let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. She had won. In her mind, she had just secured $250,000 for her growing family and completely humiliated the sister she despised. It is about time you took some accountability, Nia Chloe lectured, adopting the tone of a disappointed but gracious monarch. Mom and Dad are here with us now. We are having a nice family dinner. A dinner you could have been part of if you were not so deeply bitter. Brad is a generous man. He is willing to forgive this insane little episode, but we are not going to do this over the phone. You need to come here and look him in the eye when you sign those papers. I will be there, I promised, infusing my voice with desperate gratitude. I told Mom I would come by at 7 o'clock. I have the papers printed out. I just want to put this behind us and be a family again. Make sure you look presentable, Chloe commanded. Brad wants to record your apology on video, just to ensure you do not try to change your story and run back to the police tomorrow. We will be waiting in the main living room. Do not be late. She ended the call with a sharp click. I had lowered my phone, wiped the fake tears from my eyes, and smiled. They had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. They had confirmed that all four of them were gathered in the main living room. They had confirmed that Brad was actively demanding a forced confession on video to cover up his federal crimes. And they had done it all over a recorded cellular line that was being actively monitored and transcribed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was a masterclass in self-incrimination. Now, sitting at the gate of their luxury subdivision, the intercom finally buzzed to life. "State your name," the automated voice of the neighborhood security guard demanded. "Nia," I replied smoothly. "I am expected at the Bradston residence." There was a brief pause before the heavy iron gates began to slowly roll open. The path to the slaughterhouse was clear. I drove my vehicle up the steep, winding roads of the gated community. The neighborhood was a sprawling monument to excess, featuring massive stone facades, pristine landscaping, and expensive luxury vehicles parked in circular driveways. It was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The kind of quiet that comes from people who believe their wealth isolates them from the consequences of the real world. I turned onto my sister's street and immediately spotted the tactical advantages. Two unmarked black utility vans were parked seamlessly near the neighborhood clubhouse, masquerading as maintenance vehicles. A utility repair truck was idling near the fire hydrant at the end of the cul-de-sac. I knew exactly who was sitting inside those vehicles. Dozens of federal agents in full tactical gear waiting in the shadows, listening to the live audio feed from my encrypted wire. I pulled my car into Chloe and Brad's massive circular driveway, parking directly behind Brad's sleek imported sports car. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence of my cabin for one final moment. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the reality of the situation settle over me. I was about to permanently destroy my family. I was about to send my brother-in-law to a federal penitentiary and render my sister entirely destitute. I was about to watch my parents' social standing disintegrate into absolute ash. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. They had built this pyre with their own hands. They had poured the gasoline with their constant emotional abuse, their blinding prejudice, and their relentless greed. I was simply the spark they had arrogantly decided to ignite. I picked up my designer handbag. Inside, resting against the smooth leather lining, was the forged deed of gift they demanded I sign. And right next to it, heavy and cold, was my silver federal badge. I stepped out of the car, the crisp evening air hitting my face. I smoothed out my blazer, adjusted my posture, and walked purposefully toward the towering mahogany double doors of the mansion. The front porch was brightly lit by gas lanterns, casting a warm, inviting glow that completely masked the hostility waiting inside. I did not bother ringing the doorbell. I knew they were watching me through their advanced security cameras, waiting to gloat over my arrival. I reached out, turned the heavy brass handle, and pushed the door open, stepping across the threshold into the belly of the beast. The chessboard was perfectly set. It was time for checkmate. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the echoing grand foyer of the Bradston estate. The house was a towering temple to new money and terrible decisions. Twin crystal chandeliers cast a harsh, brilliant light over the imported Italian marble floors. Every piece of art, Every oversized vase and every gilded mirror screamed of a desperate need to project absolute superiority. I walked slowly down the hallway, the sound of my heels absorbed by the plush, hand-tufted rugs. From the sunken living room ahead, the clinking of glasses and low, arrogant laughter drifted toward me. I rounded the corner and stood at the top of the short stairwell leading down into their immaculate, entertaining space. The scene below looked exactly like a carefully staged promotional photograph for a luxury lifestyle magazine. Brad was sprawled across a massive white leather sectional, his legs crossed at the ankle, and a freshly lit cigar resting in a heavy crystal ashtray beside him. He looked like a man who had just conquered the entire financial world. A smug, highly punchable grin was plastered across his face. Chloe sat perched on the armrest next to him, her hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. She wore a silk designer lounging set that likely cost more than a month of my supposed accounting salary. When she saw me standing there, her lips curled into a deep, victorious smirk. The golden child was sitting on her throne, looking down at the peasant who had dared to challenge her kingdom. My parents, Marcus and Valerie, occupied the matching love seat opposite them. My father swirled a glass of dark amber liquid, his posture relaxed and authoritative. My mother looked me up and down with that familiar dissecting gaze, judging my modest blazer and simple slacks against their opulent surroundings. They looked incredibly proud not of me but of the wealthy white son-in-law who had successfully crushed my rebellion. "Well, look who finally decided to join reality," Brad announced, his voice booming through the cavernous room. He did not stand up to greet me. He simply gestured toward a single empty accent chair, positioned explicitly in the center of the room, isolating me from their united front. "Have a seat, Nia. We have a lot of business to conclude tonight." I walked down the 3 steps and took the seat. The trap was fully armed. I just needed them to dance around the bait a little longer. "You look terrible, sweetheart," Valerie noted, her tone dripping with fake maternal pity. "But I suppose losing your job and realizing the severity of your mental state will do that to a person. It takes a big person to admit when they are completely defeated. I told your father that this suspension was exactly the reality check you needed." Chloe let out a sharp, chiming laugh. "I told you, Mom, she just needed to hit rock bottom. You cannot go through life acting like a bitter, jealous spinster and expect people to just hand you things." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "You tried to ruin my family, Nia. You tried to send my husband to jail over a temporary cash flow adjustment because you could not stand the fact that he is building an empire while you sit alone in a cubicle. But look at you now, crawling back here to beg for our mercy." Brad chuckled, taking a slow drag from his cigar and blowing the thick smoke toward the vaulted ceiling. "Let us not be too hard on her, Chloe. She is here to make amends." He reached over to the heavy marble coffee table and tapped a thick stack of printed papers resting next to a sleek silver pen. "The deed of gift, the non-disclosure agreement, and the script for your public apology video. My lawyers drafted everything perfectly. Once you sign these and read the script into that camera," he pointed to a smartphone mounted on a tall tripod in the corner of the room, "we will consider this unfortunate little episode closed." Marcus leaned forward, adopting his best authoritative patriarch voice. "You should be thanking Brad on your hands and knees, Nia. A lesser man would have sued you into absolute oblivion for what you did today. He is giving you a second chance to be part of this family. Sign the papers, record the video, and we can finally put your embarrassing behavior behind us. We can go back to being a respected family in this city." I looked at the legal documents resting on the marble table. I looked at the tripod set up to broadcast my humiliation to their entire social circle. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance radiating from the 4 of them was staggering. They were entirely convinced of their own invincibility. They genuinely believed that their wealth and status made them untouchable gods. "You want me to record a video saying I made up the grand larceny charges?" I asked, keeping my voice soft, submissive, and perfectly matching their expectations of a broken woman. "You want me to legally gift you $250,000. It is not a gift." Nia, Brad corrected, his voice dripping with condescension as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It is restitution for the damage you tried to cause my pristine reputation." It is the price of your readmission into this family. You played a stupid game, and you lost spectacularly. I outsmarted you. My lawyers outsmarted you. Now be a good little accountant and pick up the pen. Chloe smirked, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Think of it as an investment in your own sanity, Nia. Brad is doing you a massive favor by taking that money off your hands. You clearly do not know how to manage wealth anyway. Maybe after you sign, we will let you stay for dinner. We ordered from that upscale Italian place you could never afford on your own. The hidden microphone taped securely beneath my collar captured every single syllable. Every threat, every admission of financial coercion, and every arrogant demand was streaming live to the Federal Command Center just outside their neighborhood. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, absorbing their mockery and letting them bask in the absolute peak of their delusion. This was the highest point of their artificial mountain, which meant the fall was going to be absolutely devastating. I looked Brad dead in the eye and let the fake terrified expression melt completely off my face. I sat up straight, rolling my shoulders back, and let a cold, sharp smile touch my lips. The sudden shift in my demeanor caused a flicker of confusion to pass across my mother's face. I reached my hand slowly into my designer leather bag. Brad laughed again, assuming I was reaching for a tissue to wipe away tears of defeat. But I was not reaching for a tissue. My hand closed around the cold, heavy leather wallet resting at the bottom of my purse. I drew it out smoothly, and instead of a pen or a tissue, I slammed it directly onto the center of the marble coffee table, right on top of the forged deed of gift. The sharp smack of heavy metal hitting stone echoed like a gunshot through the vaulted living room. Brad stopped laughing. His smug expression froze as his eyes dropped to the object. The leather wallet had fallen open, displaying a gleaming silver shield bearing the Great Seal of the United States. Right below it, in crisp, bold lettering, was my full name and my official title: Senior Forensic Investigator, Joint Federal Task Force. My father leaned forward, squinting at the badge, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. My mother blinked rapidly, unable to comprehend what she was looking at. Chloe just stared blankly at the silver shield, as if it were an alien artifact that had magically materialized in her perfect living room. "You can keep your pen, Brad," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence with absolute razor-sharp authority. "I will not be signing any of your forged documents today, and you are not going to be charging me for any temporary bridge loans." Brad swallowed hard. The color began to rapidly drain from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. His confident posture collapsed. The hand holding his expensive cigar began to tremble, sending a dusting of gray ash fluttering down onto his pristine white leather couch. He recognized the seal. He recognized the federal authorities staring back at him. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Chloe demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "Did you buy a fake badge online just to come here and scare us? Mom, tell her to stop playing these psychotic games." "This is not a game, Chloe," I replied, keeping my eyes entirely locked on Brad. "I want you to listen to me very carefully, Brad. You did not hack into the private savings account of a mid-level corporate accountant. You used a shared password vault to breach a highly classified federal honeypot. That $250,000 you wired offshore this week was seed money provided directly by the United States Department of the Treasury. You stole sovereign government capital." My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Nia, what are you saying?" "I am saying, your perfect son-in-law is a federal criminal," Valerie, I stated without breaking my gaze away from him. "When you routed that stolen money across state lines to your offshore shell account, you committed interstate wire fraud. When you forged my signature on that power of attorney and handed it to the Atlanta Police Department, you committed aggravated identity theft and obstruction of justice. And when your aggressive corporate lawyers sent a courier to my apartment today, demanding I sign away my assets, under the threat of a malicious defamation lawsuit, you formally committed federal extortion and mail fraud." Brad opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The slick, fast-talking broker, who had just spent the last 10 minutes lecturing me about high-level real estate acquisitions, was entirely paralyzed. His arrogant facade had been utterly stripped away, leaving nothing but a desperate, cowardly thief staring down the barrel of decades in a federal penitentiary. "You are lying!" Marcus boomed, trying to resurrect his patriarchal authority. He stood up from the love seat, his face flushed dark with anger and denial. "This is a complete fabrication. Brad manages millions. He does not need to steal from the government. You are trying to frame him because you are bitter." I turned my head slowly and looked at my father. My expression was so cold and devoid of any familial submission that he actually took a half step backward. "He is bankrupt, Marcus." I delivered the truth with clinical precision. "His boutique investment firm has been insolvent for 6 months. The Midtown condo project he talks about constantly does not exist. It is a phantom portfolio he uses to string along his remaining investors. He is drowning in debt, and he targeted me because he thought I was weak. He thought this family had beaten me down so severely that I would just roll over and let him rob me to maintain the illusion of your precious white proximity." Chloe let out a sharp, terrified wail. She clutched her pregnant belly and turned to her husband. "Brad, tell them she is lying. Tell them this is just one of her jealous episodes. Please, Brad, say something." But Brad could not say anything. He dropped his cigar into the crystal ashtray and buried his face in his hands. His silence was the loudest confession he could have possibly made. The reality of his absolute ruin was crashing down on him. "You thought you were the smartest person in the room," I continued, my voice echoing with unrelenting judgment. "You thought you could use my family toxic dynamic as a shield. You weaponized their prejudice against me. You helped them orchestrate my suspension from my cover job to cut off my resources. You tried to trap me in this room and force me to record a humiliating apology just to feed your miserable ego. But every single word you have spoken in this house over the last 10 minutes has been transmitted via a live encrypted wire to a federal command center. You just confessed to multiple federal felonies on a recorded government line." Valerie began to cry. Not the calculated manipulative tears she used to win arguments, but genuine ragged sobs of sheer panic. She looked at the silver badge on the table and then looked at the man she had proudly showcased to all her country club friends. Her entire social standing, her flawless reputation, and her arrogant pride were disintegrating into ash right before her eyes. I looked down at the expensive watch on my wrist. The seconds ticked away with beautiful rhythmic finality. I looked back up at the four of them, taking in their ruined, terrified faces. "You wanted to teach me a lesson about consequences tonight," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "Consider the lesson delivered." I reached out and retrieved my badge from the marble table, slipping it back into my blazer pocket. I took one step back from the couch, creating a clear line of sight to the grand foyer. "Your time is officially up, Brad," I announced. The words had barely left my lips when the heavy silence of the neighborhood was violently shattered by the screaming wail of approaching sirens. Red and blue lights began flashing wildly through the towering front windows, casting chaotic shadows across the imported marble floors. Heavy boots pounded against the front porch. "Federal agents! Open the door!" The booming voice from outside was instantly followed by the deafening crack of a steel battering ram striking solid wood. The custom mahogany double doors did not just swing open. They splintered and blew violently inward, raining expensive wood shards and shattered glass across the imported marble foyer. A specialized entry team of FBI and IRS criminal investigation agents flooded into the house like a tidal wave of dark tactical gear and blinding flashlights. The sheer kinetic energy of the breach sucked the air right out of the room. Red laser sights swept across the vaulted ceilings, tracing down the walls and settling squarely on the sunken living room. "Bradston, get your hands in the air and get on the ground right now." Brad did not even have the time to process the command or drop his cigar. Two heavily armored agents vaulted down the 3 carpeted steps and tackled him simultaneously. The arrogant broker, who had just been demanding my absolute submission, was violently yanked off his pristine white leather couch. He hit the marble floor face first with a sickening thud. An agent planted a heavy knee squarely between his shoulder blades and yanked his arms roughly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed brilliantly through the room, sealing his fate in an instant. Chloe let out an ear-piercing shriek. She scrambled backward, knocking over an end table and sending a crystal vase crashing to the floor. She pressed herself against the far wall, clutching her pregnant belly and hyperventilating in pure terror. Marcus and Valerie stood completely frozen. My father had his hands raised in the air, his face drained of all its usual patriarchal authority and bluster. My mother was shaking violently, unable to tear her eyes away from the sight of her perfect, successful son-in-law getting his face pressed into the cold, hard floor by federal law enforcement. Agent Carter stepped through the ruined front doors, adjusting his tactical vest and holding a thick sheaf of legal documents. He surveyed the chaotic scene and locked eyes with me, giving a sharp professional nod before turning his attention to the man squirming on the ground. Bradston, you are under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, aggravated identity theft, and obstruction of justice, Carter announced, his voice projecting absolute unyielding federal authority. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you use it because you have already talked yourself into a 20-year federal sentence tonight. Brad was sobbing. The loud, confident investor who was supposed to elevate my family into the highest echelons of society was gone, replaced by a pathetic, weeping mess. He begged the agents to loosen the cuffs, babbling incoherently about a misunderstanding and offering to call his lawyers. Carter ignored him completely and turned his attention to Chloe. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the furniture," Carter instructed, pulling a specialized warrant from his stack of papers. "We are executing a comprehensive federal asset forfeiture order." Chloe stared at him with wild, terrified eyes. "Asset forfeiture? What are you talking about? This is my house." "Not anymore," Carter replied bluntly. "Our investigation confirmed that your husband has been running a localized Ponzi scheme for the last 2 years. He has been defrauding elderly investors and funneling their retirement funds through offshore shell companies. The down payment for this mansion, the luxury vehicles in your driveway, and the designer jewelry you are wearing were all purchased using stolen capital. Therefore, every single asset attached to his name is now the property of the United States government." My mother let out a choked gasp, leaning heavily against my father to keep from collapsing. The reality of the situation was finally penetrating her thick layers of denial. The flawless upper-class image they had worshipped, the luxury they had prioritized over their own daughter, was entirely financed by stolen money. The country club friends they loved to impress were going to watch them fall from grace in the most spectacular and public way possible. Agents immediately began securing the perimeter and tagging high-value items for confiscation. One agent walked outside, and I could hear the distinct heavy sound of a flatbed tow truck backing into the circular driveway to impound Brad prized imported sports car. Another agent approached Chloe, holding out a plastic evidence bag. "I am going to need that diamond necklace, ma'am," the agent stated firmly. "It is listed on the seizure manifest." Chloe looked like she was going to physically shatter. She fumbled with the clasp, her hands trembling uncontrollably, until the heavy diamond piece dropped into the plastic bag. The golden child was being stripped of her crown jewels right in her own living room. She looked over at my parents, silently begging them to fix the situation, to use their wealth and influence to make it all go away. But Marcus and Valerie were entirely powerless. All their logistical wealth and social standing meant absolutely nothing against the crushing weight of a federal indictment. I walked calmly over to the marble coffee table and picked up the extortion documents Brad's lawyers had so helpfully prepared. I handed the thick envelope directly to Agent Carter. "Here is the final piece of evidence," I told him, keeping my voice steady and strictly professional. "Signed and delivered extortion demands crossing state lines exactly as we discussed." "Excellent work," Investigator Carter replied, taking the envelope and securing it in an evidence pouch. "We have the perimeter locked down. You are clear to exit the operational zone whenever you are ready." I turned to look at my family one last time. Brad was being hauled to his feet by 2 agents, his custom-tailored suit wrinkled and covered in dust from the floor. He refused to look at me, keeping his tear-streaked face angled downward in absolute shame. The agents marched him up the stairs and guided him roughly out the front door. Outside, the flashing red and blue emergency lights illuminated the faces of dozens of wealthy neighbors who had gathered on their manicured lawns to watch the spectacle. The entire exclusive subdivision was witnessing the arrest. By tomorrow morning, the gossip would spread through their elite social circles like a wildfire. My parents' pristine reputation was dead and buried permanently. I buttoned my blazer and stepped carefully over the shattered remains of their front door. I did not offer them a goodbye. I did not demand an apology. They had nothing left that I wanted or needed. I walked out into the cool evening air, leaving the ruins of their fake empire behind me forever. 6 months passed since I walked out into that cool evening air and left the ruins of their fake empire behind me forever. The federal justice system is notoriously slow for most cases, but when you steal directly from the United States Treasury and document your own extortion plot, the wheels of consequence turn with terrifying and absolute speed. Brad quickly learned that his smooth-talking broker persona meant absolutely nothing inside a federal courtroom. He initially tried to plead not guilty, believing his expensive corporate defense attorneys could somehow manipulate the legal system and secure him a comfortable house arrest arrangement. He was severely mistaken. The digital forensic data we presented was insurmountable. The cryptographic hash mismatches on his forged documents, the server logs tracing the wire fraud across state lines, and the live audio recording of his extortion attempt, captured right in his own living room, stripped away any possible defense strategy. When the federal prosecutor laid out the sheer magnitude of his localized Ponzi scheme, proving he had actively defrauded dozens of elderly investors to fund his luxury lifestyle, the judge showed zero leniency. Brad was convicted on multiple felony counts, including wire fraud, mail fraud, aggravated identity theft, and obstruction of justice. He was handed a 20-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. In the federal system, there is no early parole for good behavior. The arrogant golden boy who once bragged about his massive cryptocurrency portfolios over vintage bourbon is now a federal inmate wearing a standard-issue uniform, with his financial future completely eradicated. The consequences for Chloe were equally devastating. The federal asset forfeiture protocols executed on the night of the raid systematically stripped her of everything she believed made her superior. The government seized the Buckhead mansion, the luxury imported vehicles, the designer jewelry, and every single bank account tied to Brad and his illicit enterprise. She was left entirely destitute. The golden child of the family was abruptly evicted from her stolen palace, holding a newborn baby and a toddler, with absolutely no financial safety net to catch her. With her husband in federal prison and her assets liquidated by the state, Chloe had nowhere else to go. She was forced to pack whatever basic necessities the agents allowed her to keep and move back into our parents' house. But Marcus and Valerie were suddenly facing their own severe financial strain and could not afford to maintain their lavish lifestyle while absorbing an entirely new family of 3. As a result, Chloe was forced to move into the basement. It was the exact same basement she and my mother had viciously mocked me about at the restaurant just months prior. They had used that basement as a punchline to insult my independence and my character. Now Chloe spends her days down there, stripped of her pageant titles, her country club status, and her unearned pride. She is experiencing the exact reality she tried to shame me for, but unlike my situation, she has no one to blame but the criminal she chose to marry. My parents, Marcus and Valerie, learned the hardest and most humiliating lesson of all. They had spent decades building their entire identity on the perception of wealth and proximity to high society. They sacrificed their relationship with me to protect an illusion. But the elite circles of Atlanta are incredibly unforgiving to public scandal. The arrest of their beloved son-in-law was broadcast across local news networks and detailed in prominent financial publications. The explicit details of his fraud scheme, defrauding vulnerable investors and attempting to extort his own sister-in-law, became the primary topic of gossip at every charity gala and private dinner party in the city. The people my parents had spent years trying to impress immediately turned their backs on them. This total social exile translated directly into financial ruin for my parents. Their logistics company relied heavily on their pristine reputation and high-level networking contracts. Once the federal indictment became public knowledge, their major corporate clients began pulling their accounts one by one. Nobody wanted their supply chain associated with a family embroiled in a massive federal racketeering and fraud case. Their revenue plummeted, forcing them to downsize their operations and lay off a significant portion of their workforce. The social rejection was absolute. The board of directors at their exclusive country club quietly but firmly requested that they resign their membership to avoid bringing further negative press to the establishment. My mother, Valerie, who used to spend her weekends holding court at expensive boutiques and high society brunches, can no longer show her face in public without enduring the harsh, judgmental whispers of her former friends. She is entirely isolated, trapped in a quiet house with a disgraced daughter living in her basement and a crumbling business to manage. Their desperate lifelong pursuit of an artificial upper-class image had directly engineered their total collapse. They had placed all their faith in a white man with a flashy smile because he validated their internalized prejudices. They handed him their absolute loyalty, and in return, he dragged their entire legacy into the blast radius of a federal criminal investigation. They lost their wealth, they lost their status, and they lost the only daughter who ever actually possessed the quiet competence and integrity they claimed to value. I sit here tonight in the quiet luxury of my penthouse, looking out over the glittering expanse of the Atlanta skyline. I take a slow sip of my vintage red wine and enjoy the absolute tranquility of a life built entirely on my own terms. The air in my home is not thick with suffocating expectations or desperate attempts to impress strangers. It is filled with the calm, undeniable peace of hard-earned security. I still work for the Joint Federal Task Force. I still spend my days hunting down the architects of financial ruin and dismantling criminal syndicates. But when I come home, I leave the chaos at the door. My family always loved to call me selfish. They branded me a bitter, jealous woman because I refused to sacrifice my sanity and my financial stability on the altar of their toxic delusions. But the truth is, when you finally stop setting yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm, they will always try to paint you as the villain. They will weaponize the concept of family to demand your absolute submission. They will disguise their relentless greed as familial obligation and expect you to simply smile and foot the bill. I refuse to play the victim in their twisted narrative. I did not act out of malice or spite. I simply stepped aside and allowed the legal system to do its job. I let the natural consequences of their own arrogance catch up to them. If holding thieves accountable and protecting the assets I worked tirelessly to build makes me the villain in their story, then I will gladly wear that title for the rest of my life. True excellence is not about driving a leased sports car or forcing your children into a rigid mold to appease a country club demographic. It is about possessing the quiet integrity to do the right thing even when it is difficult. It is about protecting your peace, your mind, and your resources from anyone who tries to diminish your worth, regardless of whether or not they share your last name. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies you will ever face are sitting right across from you at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Do not ever apologize for protecting your territory. Guard your assets, guard your intellect, and never let anyone convince you that enduring abuse is the price of admission for family loyalty. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to draw a hard line against toxic family members, or if you have ever had to watch the natural consequences catch up to the people who wronged you, share your experience in the comments section below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and reclaiming your power. Remember, your peace is your most valuable asset, and it is always worth fighting for. Stay safe and stay strong.